You hear a high-pitched squeal when you creep into a parking space, a grinding that shows up only when you slow from 50, or the pedal feels spongy like it's passing through foam instead of metal. Maybe your car pulls slightly to one side when you brake, or there's a faint smell of hot, burnt material after a long drive down the highway. Those sounds, that smell, that feel, those are the kind of clues that tell you your brake pads are getting thin and it's time to act. Start simple. Listen and look. With the engine off and the parking brake on, spin the front wheels by hand, or have a helper slowly roll the car forward while you look through the wheel. Use a flashlight and a mirror if you need to. You're checking for the dark friction material clamped between the caliper and the rotor. New pads normally start around 8 to 12 millimeters thick. When you can see less than about 3 millimeters of friction material, replace them. If you see deep grooves in the rotor, shiny metal where the pad should be, or if the inner and outer pads on the same axle are clearly different thicknesses, note that. These are red flags. Now the pedal test. Drive at a safe low speed and apply steady braking. If the pedal feels soft, sinks down farther than before, or the car pulls to one side, those are confirmation signs. Also listen for a thin metallic scraping when you apply the brakes. Many pads have a wear indicator that makes noise before they reach critical thinness. Finally, watch for vibration through the steering wheel under braking. That usually means the rotor is warped or the pad wear is uneven. What's happening inside is simple. Brake pads are the replaceable surface that presses against the rotor to slow the car. Think of pads like the soles on a pair of shoes, and the rotors like the sidewalk. With normal walking, I'll wear down the soles slowly. If you drag your feet, run, carry heavy loads, or walk on rough surfaces, the sole disappears faster. Driving style, vehicle weight, environment, and the pad material all change how quickly the soles wear out. Pad compounds vary. Organic pads are softer and quieter, but wear faster. Semi-metallic pads bite hard and last in the middle range, but can be noisier and rougher on rotors. Ceramic pads last longest and are quieter but cost more. Heavy stop-and-go city driving, towing, and repeated hard braking can cut pad life dramatically. Salt, sand, and corrosion in winter also speed wear, and can seize caliper hardware so the pad drags and wears unevenly. Typical mileage ranges you can expect. For many everyday cars with mixed driving, a front set of pads will often last between 30,000 and 60,000 miles. Rear pads sometimes last longer, 40,000 to 70,000 miles, because rear brakes do less work on most cars. But those ranges are only guidelines. You'll see pads wearing out at 15,000 miles on a heavy city-driven SUV with aggressive drivers, and you'll see pads still thick at 80,000 on a light commuter car driven gently on the highway. If you ignore worn pads, costs climb fast. Worst case, the pads wear down to the metal backing, which grinds directly on the rotor and usually ruins the rotor surface. At that point, you're not just buying pads, but you may be paying for 2 new rotors. If the backed metal scores a rotor deep enough, the rotor must be replaced rather than resurfaced, and that can double or triple the job cost. Worse, a stuck caliper can overheat, warp rotors, and even cause brake fluid to boil under extreme conditions. That reduces stopping power and can lead to an accident. Concrete dollar ranges, in plain terms, if you do the job yourself and just need pads for one axle, parts can be $40 to $150 per axle for decent aftermarket pads. A budget pad set might be $25 to $50 per axle. A higher-end ceramic set can be $100 to $200. If you take it to a trustworthy independent shop, expect total labor plus parts around $120 to $350 per axle in most regions, depending on hourly labor rates and whether rotors need machining or replacement. Dealer rates are usually higher. $200 to $500 per axle isn't uncommon. If rotors need replacement, add roughly $60 to $200 per rotor for parts, plus another hour of labor in many shops. If a caliper or brake hose needs replacing because it seized or leaked, add $100 to $300 per caliper, including labor and parts. If you want the cheapest safe route, replace pads in matched axles, both front or both rear, before they hit 3 millimeters. If the rotors still look smooth and test fine, no deep grooves, no heavy runout, you can often reuse them after a light resurfacing for a modest fee, or just reuse them if your shop measures and confirms thickness and trueness. A fair mechanic price to demand is a clear parts and labor breakdown. Pads, parts X dollars, rotors Y dollars each, labor Z hours. Ask for brand names and the option to choose mid-range parts like well-reviewed semi-metallic or ceramic pads rather than the absolute cheapest. If you're DIY capable, replacing front pads on most cars is a 1 to 2 hour job with basic hand tools, a jack, and jack stands. Many owners want specific numbers. If both front pads are worn unevenly, inner much thinner than outer, that almost always points to a sticking caliper slide or a seized piston. The fix is either to clean and rebuild the slides and replace the pad hardware for about $30 to $80 in parts, or to replace the caliper for $80 to $250 depending on the car. Don't let a shop sell you unnecessary calipers if a simple hardware kit and cleaning will restore smooth movement. Ask them to show you the seized part or to demonstrate movement using a pry bar or air pressure on the brake fluid line before they replace it. Many useful links can be found in the description. A common dishonest line you'll hear is quote _1 _. Sometimes you do, but often you only need one axle or just the pads. Dishonest shops will recommend replacing everything to maximize the bill. Here's how to refuse politely but firmly. Ask to have the worn parts shown to you, ask for a measured pad thickness reading or a photo, and request that they only replace what you can see is necessary. If they push back, say you'll get a second opinion. Most honest shops will respect that. Another upsell tactic is pressuring you to resurface rotors that are perfectly serviceable. Rotor resurfacing was common years ago, but is less recommended now because many rotors are thin and resurfacing shortens life. Ask for a rotor thickness measurement. The shop should give you the minimum spec stamped on the rotor or in a repair manual, and a run-out test. If resurfacing is suggested, get a price for replacement versus machining. Sometimes replacing a cheap rotor is cheaper and safer than machining an older one. If you're on a tight budget and the pads are just sitting above the minimum thickness, a temporary, careful approach is to change driving habits. Avoid long, high-speed, repeated hard stops, and use engine braking where safe. But remember, that's a stopgap. Cutting costs here by delaying replacement increases risk, and the next bill could be rotors, plus labor, and maybe calipers. If you want a fair checklist for the mechanic, give them these explicit requests. Replace both pads on the driven axle, show the old pads, measure pad thickness before and after, show rotor thickness and specify whether they're resurfaced or replaced, and provide a parts list with brand names. If they charge a brake flush, be sure you actually need one. It's required if you're doing major brake servicing or if the fluid is contaminated, but not mandatory just because pads are being swapped. One practical tip for spotting scams: ask if the shop has a brake lathe and how often they recommend machining versus replacing rotors. Shops that always recommend machining on thin, modern rotors are often trying to upsell. Equally, shops that cut corners by using low-quality pads because they are cheap will be obvious in a few thousand miles when you return with continuing noise or vibration. For the DIY person who wants a safe, reputable parts choice, pick pads that match your driving. If you commute in stop-and-go traffic, a semi-metallic pad with good heat resistance is often the most practical compromise. If you mostly highway drive and want quiet, a ceramic pad is worth the extra cost. Buy pads that include new hardware and anti-squeal shims if possible. Those small pieces make a big difference in noise and even wear. Record-keeping matters. When you replace pads, write down the mileage, date, and pad thickness. That gives you a real-life baseline for your particular car and driving style so you can predict the next change with confidence. Final straight talk. If you hear grinding, smell burning, feel pulsing, or see pad material under 3 millimeters, replace the pads now. The money spent is insurance against a much larger bill and against losing your braking capacity when you need it most. A trustworthy shop or a careful DIY job is both cheaper and safer than waiting until the damage spreads. If this helped you, please hit subscribe and like. I put up real-world advice so you can make safe, cost-effective choices for your car. If you have the make and model of your car and the symptoms, drop them in the comments and I'll give a specific estimate and next steps